Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks, wherever the heck you are. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live with my main man, CJ, working the airwaves, making sure that this broadcast is coming out spiffy and clean. And we have with us the man who needs no introduction. If you don't know who he is right now, you've been living under a rock somewhere in Exceptional Stan. And it's Matthew Ehret. You can find his work over at thecanadianpatriot.com, canadianpatriot.com, as well as the Rising Tide Foundation. And please, 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 you need to. If you haven't done this already, then you're a fool of all fools. Go to his Substack, subscribe. Get yourself a very good geopolitical, geostrategic education from the man himself, Matthew Ehret. And with that all being said, Matthew, CJ, gentlemen, what is going on?
Hey, how's it going, V? Hey, CJ. Thank you for that. One thing, if people go to CanadianPatriot.com, they will not find my website. It's got to be .org. It's one of these like obscure things. But anyway, yeah, it'll work. I'm good. It's been a busy week. Very, very busy, hectic week. So yeah, I guess we'll have a lot to go over. There's a few things I wanted to talk about, and I figured we could talk about some current events a little bit. And then jump into some deeper dynamics of history that give us a better insight into the causality and the solutions to a lot of the problems that are facing the world right now. Obviously, oil has become a big thing, right? And I know you guys did had a good discussion yesterday on the some elements of this. I mean, the Middle East is flaring up again. Every time that happens, we know that there's all sorts of hectic activity in the markets. You know, the petrodollar and everything else, but also we're in a bit of a different situation from past Middle East conflict, because now we're at the actual breaking point of the entire transatlantic system. Am I on?
Yeah, you're here. Your cam just died.
Oh, that's okay. All right, not a big deal.
Okay.
Let me see if maybe I can fix it quickly. Whatever, not a big deal. So, so on so many levels right now. Right, we have the breakdown of the system. We've got the system showing all of its self-contradictions on so many levels. You know, we're sitting on the biggest derivatives time bomb in history. Everything is really, really up in the air. We're being told that there is progress happening on the markets, but at the same time, there is a complete breakdown of the physical economy. People are they're despairing for the future. I personally don't know a single person who's died of COVID directly who's been under 80 without comorbidities, but I do know several people who have committed suicide and whose businesses and livelihoods have been totally shut down. That I do know. Yep. So you could say COVID is a killer in that sense. But really the oil thing is something I wanted to unpack yet a little bit, because, you know, we have on the one hand this weird ransomware fake inside job attack on the U.S. You know, this system that provides something like 45% of the East Coast oil and natural. I don't know if it's natural gas or if it's just oil. That's been apparent. You know, it's kind of shut down. And Pete Buttigieg is coming out saying, "Yeah, that's why we need a Green New Deal, and that's why we should just approve the $2 trillion green energy infrastructure package."
Well, I'll ride bicycles to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Pete Booty Juice is out there doing his thing, man.
No, it's completely economically incompetent. And I mean, the logic is, yeah, if we had solar panels and windmills everywhere, then there couldn't be a Russian hack on pipelines and oil grids. Yeah, sure, but you couldn't sustain your industry either. You couldn't sustain your civilization either if you had those windmills and solar panels and no fossil fuels. So that's a complete idiotic fraud. But that's what's being said there. Nord Stream 2, the fight continues, right? They've made an announcement that they're going to get the thing done by September of this year, but you don't really know. The Green Party of Germany has said that they're completely in opposition and could easily cancel it. We're being fed all sorts of propaganda that these things could be taken. We're basically being told that the population doesn't want this. They don't want Russian gas. And so there's like these surveys being fed in the mass media to Europeans saying that, no, this is undemocratic to finalize this pipeline, despite the fact that it's obviously in everybody's interest to have access to energy and to be able to pay your heating bills. And then China's being attacked. for a number of things, but one of the big things that Biden and Blinken have been going on a rant about for months has been that the BRI is spreading carbon dioxide and pollution and fossil fuels around the world. Yeah, it's just over the top. And then finally, the thing that really caught my eye was William Hague, the former Defense Secretary of the UK, just penned an article saying the military, under the new wisdom, the new ethic of the world, as his masters see this ethic taking shape, must be to use the military instead of defending oil from nations trying to use the oil. So the idea would be, in his mind, that under a Green New Deal world civilization that's decarbonizing by 2050, that all of the the militaries of the enlightened parts of the world should be stopping nations from accessing their oil, which would just contribute to destroy us all if we let that happen.
I want William Hague to take a pistol, put it into his mouth, and decarbonize himself.
Yeah,
I mean, they should go first. I mean, don't you agree, Matthew? I mean, I think that the politicians of the West, in the UK Parliament, in the District of Criminals here in Washington, D.C., and in Brussels, should all be gifted a 30 to maybe a 40 caliber round, and then put it, directly into their mouths and decarbonize. Lead by example, gentlemen. Lead by example. Please decarbonize yourselves. Save us all the trouble. Did I lose you?
Matthew, did we lose your mic as well?
You muted yourself.
Oh, there he goes. Okay, his cam's back. Yeah, his stream's back.
Matt, you got to unmute yourself.
Hey, Matthew, if you want, hit the back button and then rejoin StreamYard altogether, if that will help. Yeah, but V, I completely agree with you. As Matthew is regaining connection here, I mean, I heard that the UN or whatever body is wanting us to start eating like different type of protein, like worms and other things, insects. And getting away.
Right. And meanwhile, these guys will continue to eat prime rib and filet mignon and ribs and chicken and all the other deliciousness. We're going to have fake pink meat. We're going to have plant-based foods because you got these vegan morons. Folks, humans are not vegans. It's the most stupidest thing in the world. There's never been a vegan civilization. If I dropped you in the jungle and you're vegan, you're going to be dead in 24 hours. The whole point of what I'm trying to say is this, okay? They are not only trying to de-industrialize you, they're trying to neutral. They're trying to get rid of any sort of nutrients, any sort of vitality. They're trying to devitalize you as well. And this is the problem. And it's like the professor, I forgot who it was, the professor over at Austin a couple of years ago, who stood there during the I think the first term of the Obama administration and literally in tears crying, humanity is a plague, and we must stop all births. There has to be a global population reduction. Now I sound like Bill Clinton. There has to be a global population reduction, kind of like what Bill Clinton was saying. But anyway, this guy was out there saying, this Austin professor, and he's crying, and the people up there are standing up and clapping, and I'm saying to myself, listening to this Austin idiot, saying, dude, if you're a professor in the University of Texas in Austin, and you're talking about, there needs to be a population reduction, then follow by example, take a 40 caliber and eat it. Put it to your gun. Eat your own gun, dude. Put it in your mouth and blast yourself, and then go do it. Lead by example. Lead by example. No, they won't do it. It's like Klaus Schwab. You will earn nothing, and you will be happy. Okay, Klaus, show by example. Sell off your wealth. Sell off your billions of dollars in assets, sell it all off, give it to the poor, and you show me what that looks like, Klaus. Crickets. These people are sick.
Mm-hmm.
Good, man.
Well, yeah, they really don't believe in any idea of morality whatsoever. They believe only in a sort of practical morality, which is that there's one morality for the slaves and one morality for the elites.
Yep.
And really, it's just an ethical convention that's created to just moderate and stabilize society. But there's no intrinsic value to the idea of justice in their minds or anything like that. It's all metaphysical garbage. In fact, in their minds, it's really just what defines justice is just the power of your will to impose itself onto the weaker. It's very much rooted in social Darwinism. There's nothing that they believe is intrinsic morally in the fabric, not only of the species of mankind, but also of the universe. It's not there. And then you compare that to like the type of thinking of Benjamin Franklin or the authors of the U.S. Declaration of Independence that saw that rights are inalienable, right? That we have equal rights because we're made in the image of a creator. And it's not because some sovereign bestowed, had a good day and chose to bestow and grant us rights that we have them. They're already there because we're human. So that view that gave rise to the type of movement historically that broke the colony free of the British Empire, which was the first time that had ever happened and created a new form of government back in 1776. Here I am in Canada. I look longingly upon that because we failed every time that challenge came to our doorstep. We took the wrong choice.
You have been captured, Matthew. You have been captured.
Yeah, British Canada, total slave colony. But at least there's a lot of common heritage, except that at various points of choice we took the wrong path. So it's a diametrically opposed paradigm that gave rise to that people like Klaus Schwab and these other technocrats trying to rule over the masses of basically their victims. They're in total opposition to this as a historic force. And this goes back, you could see traces of this battle going back thousands of years to the time of Plato in ancient Athens, working against the opposing schools that had been controlled by the cult of Delphi that ran the banks, at the time it was the treasuries. And it's the same thing. One school believed that human beings are just born into their stations and that's their destiny, as well as the kids and grandkids of the slave is to be a slave. And the masters, you're hereditarily born into a better family. And so your entire bloodline is thus guaranteed, based only on blood, no merit, right? Nothing of competence or morality are associated with that formula.
Wow, that's a complete and that's like a complete opposite of Western elites as opposed to what you see with the ruling class in China, where it is meritocracy based, not on blood. Hence the rise of Xi Jinping.
Yeah, no, very much so. Yeah, and I mean, you couldn't get away with having like a George Bush character in a position of high office in China. It couldn't happen. The amount of work you have to do to prove your competency, and on so many levels. You have to be able to manage a municipality, manage a province, which in many cases in China, their provinces are bigger than, the entire population of the United States. And then there's a whole selection process going on whereby the best of the best who have real understanding are brought into higher positions of power. And they can be removed from that if they don't do their job, if they can't execute direct, concrete tasks. And it's not simply about talking well or giving a good speech. That's really become a corruption of the West. So yeah, vital. But that's also why they're going out of their way to just cut all and sever all ties with China. Like right now, the European Union, they're also shooting themselves in the foot, saying that they're going to renege and not follow through on their European-China cooperation agreement. That's now something that is being thrown up in smoke. And you're thinking, well, why? Before my mic and my video cut off, I was just bringing up the different destruction of that's being waged on the issue of fossil fuels. There's obviously an attack on fossil fuels, but at the same time, it seems like many of these companies like Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil they're going along enthusiastically with many elements of this shutdown and decarbonization. Yep. The banks, the major
lending,
banks,
absolutely, the lending,
yeah,
right, yeah,
yeah, exactly. The major banks have signed central bankers' climate compacts to prevent lending to companies that engage in dirty activities like producing CO2. The biggest corporations like Amazon, Apple, Microsoft have all signed on to decarbonization compacts under Bezos, Zuckerberg, and whoever, Gates. So you're like, up until now, this is challenging for a lot of people who haven't made this mental leap, because, and by that I'm referring to all of the people who still believe that the world is just run by money and oil. And that's been a popular thing to cynically just say, oh yeah, wars, it's all wars for oil. Everything, the world turns around money. And it's like, there's something else. There's something else going on that you're missing if you think that, because then if you think that, you can't account for why all of these nations are subverting themselves financially. They could be making so much more money working with China. They could be making so much more money developing their fossil fuels in a common sense way, or developing even better nuclear power.
But that would threaten the ruling class in the West, because that would mean working with China, working with Russia in the multipolar world, that would enrich and enlarge the Western society's middle class. And they can't have that, because their only competition comes from the middle class. Their only opposition comes from the middle class. Their only resistance comes from the middle class. And these psychopathic, neo-feudalistic dictators will not have that.
No, exactly. No, and that's a vital point that you brought up, because the idea of a middle class, this is a relatively new phenomenon as well, right? Like before the Industrial Revolution, there was no such thing really as a middle class. You were born poor as a serf, almost, you worked the fields and maybe you sold cloth or something, but your life was pretty much squalor. Or you were lucky enough to be born into an upper crust family. There was like a small managerial class of civil servants and things who, were the closest thing to a middle class you could see, but it wasn't really that, because they were all beholden entirely to the oligarchy. So it's only with the Industrial Revolution that you started creating a division of labor. All of a sudden, people were able to have more sovereignty over their destiny and not be a part of this elite class of hereditary power. People like Ben Franklin, who I brushed upon earlier, he wasn't from an elite family. He was, from a poor family, but he had a sense of industry. He had opportunity that not only did he find, but he created opportunities for himself and others by his creativity. You couldn't get that in the old Europe. Things were too encrusted and crystallized, corruption-wise, in the old system in Europe. You could only get that in the New World, that type of environment to creatively create new conditions. So that's what the oligarchy, for sure, they're totally afraid of that, and especially after World War II. The idea of having a world that would have no hunger, no starvation, no war, the way Franklin Delano Roosevelt had made his four freedoms a governing principle of the Atlantic Charter, of what he intended for the Bretton Woods to become. That was a real thing. It wasn't just idealized philosophy for a lot of people who just beat, fascism. And they were coming back from having nearly, died in World War II back to their home countries. And the idea was to carry forth the dream of Franklin Roosevelt, who had negotiated meetings with leaders from all sorts of countries, from India and South America and the Middle East, Iran, to help all these countries develop full spectrum economies and industry using America's military production capabilities. But instead of using it for war, to use it for, it was called the arsenal of democracy. Now, that idea, again, scared the hell out of the oligarchy that had been losing its grip on the system. Their Hitler monster, their Frankenstein monster blew up in their face. So that really crippled and upset their plans that had been put into motion quite some time before Hitler arose. This was, you could say even the League of Nations was the first modern attempt at a new global British empire under world government in 1919. And they had already set the stage for World War II back in 1919, way before World War II happened. Their idea was to just use fascism as a new type of enforcement agency to break the will of nations of the world, and then get these fascist frontmen to be their puppet dictators on behalf of the City of London and the other elites of the old system. So that didn't work out. Hitler didn't want to obey some of those rules, some of those commands, and he went in a certain way renegade by listening to his generals instead of the City of London, and they were losing a lot of their power. So by 1945, when Roosevelt dies, Britain is very weak, and they have to work very hard to reorganize themselves in opposition to this new age of republics, an era of sovereign republics working on big projects together, That was the hope of all mankind. Even back in 1776, Benjamin Franklin had this vision already back then. So it's a long fight. Now, that's what I want to kind of get at here, because I mentioned before, people who believe that the world runs by money and oil today, they're totally confused. I was listening to Russell Brand. I like Russell Brand. He's a funny guy, but he's
crikey, man. He's kind of funny.
He's super
like,
super
what
funny.
would happen if, like, the oil powers? Okay.
Well, and real quick too, and just in Matthew, in regards to Nazism and so forth, is that let's in fairness, I think that selected parts of Nazism were kind of picked apart and exported to different parts of the world, including here in the United States.
Operation Paperclip.
Ben oui, yes, exactly.
And right after 9/11, Matt, who did we invite over here to form the rudiments of the Patriot Act and the Department of Homeland Security? Was it not Marcus Wolf, the famous Stasi general?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was Stasi General Marcus Wolf who came and who created the backbone of what would become Homeland Security. So you had somebody who was a former East German Stasi, a head of the Stasi, who came here and developed Homeland Security for the United States. I mean, dude, the penchant that these rulers have for tyrants and tyrannical methods is incredible, Matt. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, the individual who was set up by Alan Dulles in Germany to run the East German intelligence after, West German intelligence in 1947 was actually Hitler's intelligence commander. The guy who ran Nazi intelligence was the guy that Alan Dulles recruited and then put back into a position of power after World War II was over in Germany. And there were recent documents that were they were declassified in 1998, that it was something like 2 million documents were declassified, going through the extent of Hitler's intelligence network that were commandeered by the CIA and MI6 during the Cold War and used against the Soviet Union. So the whole thing, I mean, there's so much of our history that we're not told. And yeah, I see that you just pulled up my recent article from this Victory Day. So, and that's the question I try to pose, is that, for Victory Day, which was May 9th, isn't it about time we think about winning World War II? Basically, that, if the same financiers and industrialists like, the Standard Oil interests, the Rockefeller interests, the City of London Morgan interests, and Montague Norman interests, if they were all of the primary backers of eugenics, the science of racial sterilization of the system, and the rise of Mussolini and Franco and Nazism, if they were all the agencies that made that happen, and none of them were punished after World War II, but in fact reorganized and got more power in the ensuing 7 decades, could it be said that the Allies actually won World War II? And right there is a picture of Hjalmar Schacht with obviously his boss, and the character to the right is Prescott Bush. And that, Prescott Bush is the guy. Patriot. Yeah, right. This guy was a senator. He ran union banking, which was directly doing business with Fritz Thyssen, with the Nazi machine, all the way up until 1942, until his
Brown
estate.
Brothers Harriman.
Brown Brothers Harriman were, he was directly part of that. And that's just one of many. And this is the guy that gave, that created a complete dynasty that he was rewarded for, because basically he didn't himself become president, but he was guaranteed by his masters that you've done such a good job that we're going to allow you to have a little mini dynasty. And his son became the head of the CIA. He created 2 presidents, nearly created a 3rd Jeb Bush president if Trump hadn't destroyed that operation. So yeah, there's a complete history there that we're not told about for obvious reasons. And when you look at today, okay, so what do you have? And for the second half of today's show, I just wanted to really unpack a little bit of the thinking behind the 4th Industrial Revolution. So people often hear people like Klaus Schwab talking about the 4th Industrial Revolution, which is going to replace the fossil fuel industrial economy that we've had now for supposedly the last 70 years. So this is the theme of the upcoming COP27 summit in the UK. It's what Biden is committed to. But what is the fourth industrial revolution? And essentially, it's just AI automation. So, you know, the concept is we've had a few different stages of industrial revolution since the 17th century and the use of the steam engine and mills and things of that sort. Now we're entering, we've been in the electronics computer age, the third industrial revolution for some time, and now we're entering a new one where we're told a new phase of human evolution is occurring. Artificial intelligence, machine learning are going to increasingly just take over the things that we used to do as human beings. Human beings are going to become more irrelevant, and automation run by AI is going to do most things. We already see a lot of this creeping up into military systems planning, things like Pathfinder for the Arctic, and many other things that are defining the U.S. military battle plans in the Pacific and around Russia's perimeter. These are being highly infested with machine learning theories. And yeah, some of this is not, I mean, intrinsically terrible. I'm not against automation in any way. I think it's a great thing that human beings can be liberated from physical burdens in order to use their minds more. That's great. But, you know, people like Yuval Hariri, the WWII, World Economic Forum ideologue, they love this guy. You know, he's among those who say, or Elon Musk even, frankly, who has a different take on the same thing with his Neuralink, is that ultimately we're entering a new age of the useless class. That now, with the machines doing everything, all of the 50-year-old truck drivers, machinists, they could either become yoga teachers or something, but they're probably not going to do that. So they're now part of the useless class. I want to be a
yoga teacher.
Well, there's a place for you in the new society, I guess.
I can't wait.
But you can see, like, how many yoga teachers do we need, right? Like so these people are really kind of looking at the problem of this new useless class. And Elon Musk is saying, well, with his Neuralink, which also, might I add, Jeff Bezos is a part of, Zuckerberg is a big investor in this whole Neuralink thing, that human beings have to merge with machines in order to stay relevant. Otherwise, there will be an obvious, like, Terminator 3 battle with machines, or Matrix, right? That's our inevitable destiny, is to go to war with the machines that way. And the only way
that's the stupidity of this whole entire thing. If you notice, right, these guys tend to overhype everything, right? Check this out. First, it was the world's going to freeze over. It's going to be an ice age. They hyped that up to oblivion. Then it was global warming. The world's going to burn up and die. Now it's climate change. These are, look, here's the thing about the West, okay? They're criminals. They're criminals with fanciful tales. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is this, okay? They lie to you, and they exponentially aggrandize these existential threats that are going to wipe out humanity, and it's going to end your life and all this other stuff. And it's fanciful fairy tales made up in think tanks with lowbrow people. Mm-hmm. There's never going to be a damn AI. Ever. Why? Because the AI is complicit to the will of its programmer. It's what it is, man. Right? There's never going to be Skynet going self-aware and all that other bullshit. It's marketing in Hollywood, and they use these cultural connotations and this pop culture ubiquitous thought in order to get into your minds that this is what's going to be happening. Either you merge with the machines, and who controls the machines? They do. Merge with the machines, otherwise you're going to be irrelevant. Or you don't want to go to war with the Terminators. You don't want to have that happen one day. Go ahead, Matt. This is crazy, these psychopaths.
No, exactly. They're control freaks, and they're hiding behind they hide behind mechanisms that they create that don't really exist, so that we can't see what they actually want to do. Because if we just saw with a clear mind what was actually shaping the system that we are born into and are living, we would do something about it. We would be horrified, disgusted, and we would organize appropriately in opposition to, let's say there's a mass kill or a mass culling of the herd. If that's an intention, we would do something. So they say, oh, look, nature is just organized by complexity. There's this infinite wall of randomness and complexity that self-organizes. And don't worry about it. That's just the way things are. That's the way it is in nature. the planetary orbits are just the way they are because that's just how the dust cloud originally formed randomly around a sun that's just randomly there with no purpose. And we got lucky that we're on one of these like third rocks from the sun that happened to be conducive to life. And so life just randomly happened. Don't talk about how that happened because like, electricity just hit some, chemicals floating around in some ooze and then like life happened. And then just it happened to luckily just unfold the way it does. From simple celled amoebas all the way to like, walking organisms that can eventually develop conscious reasoning. It's all lucky.
Contrary to the law of entropy. Contrary to the law of entropy.
Always contrary. And so if they admit that there is some non-entropic process, they'll say, oh, that's just an isolated case of non-entropy in an otherwise dead, dying universe. For those who don't know, entropy is simply the idea that there is that all systems that are entropic are closed. Because they're closed, there is a limited amount of energy to sustain the mechanisms within the system. Let's say you're dealing with a fuel in a gas tank in your car. That's a good example of an entropic system. You put the fuel in, the pistons move, there's burning happening, it gets action happening for the car, but it's always running down to a point of no action, right? As there's only so much oil in there and it's not going to create more oil as it's burning. So they'll say, okay, animal life evolution is not like that, but ultimately it's an isolated case that will ultimately be extinguished by the heat death of the universe, which is like that, is what they'll say. Because every time you have more living matter, that's more energy being consumed by the processes of life that are no longer distributed in the universe, and that thus ultimately life itself, the non-entropic life, is ultimately tied to the death of the universe. We're accelerating the death of the universe. That would happen anyway, but we're just making it faster. And human life, which creates, I mean, we went from like 1 billion of our species living 150 years ago to what, 8 billion, almost 9 billion soon, in a very short period. That's a lot of new living human matter that's supported by agro-industrial activity. That's accelerating the heat death even faster by sucking parasitically the vital limited energy from the universe into our greedy needs. And so to be good and in harmony with the universe, we should just depopulate. And like the Great Reset, there's a website run by a bunch of advertising executives. They try to make it sound like grassroots. It's called it's like for hipsters. It's the Great Reset for hipsters. And you look at this website and they say, how great is it that under COVID lockdown, human CO2 production went down 7%. But they say, in order to meet the Paris Climate Accords, we have to keep doing this every year for the next 20 years. So we have to act for the next 20 years as if we are in lockdown because that's how we're going to save the world from burning under human-caused global warming. Bullshit. There's nothing, like you said, behind this scientifically, but they just repeat it and they try to make it look cool for hipsters or something. So what is behind this fourth industrial revolution is an idea that goes back to, well, here, actually, you know what? There's several points on this that I want to share, but I figured there's 3 organizations run by 3 people with 3 quotes that I wanted to just share very quickly. Yeah. Because sometimes just reading a quote, a statement of intention by somebody, drives the point home more than a lot of description could do. So I'm just doing a share screen, and the first organization, I mentioned that the British were trying to reorganize their empire after World War II. You guys can see what I'm seeing?
Yes, it's on screen.
Okay, now my quote is very small. I'm sorry for that. This is a guy named G. Brock Chrisholm. He was a Canadian psychiatrist. He worked at London's Tavistock clinic in the 1920s, and Chrisholm becomes the founder, the first Secretary General of the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization grew out of the League of Nations Health Organization, which had basically petered out, wasn't worth anything by the end of World War II. The League of Nations was a failed project, and that was a world government project to get rid of nation states completely from 1919 when it was created. So what they wanted to do is to take control of these organizations that Franklin Roosevelt and his collaborators had created in 1945-46 like the UN, like the IMF, the World Bank, and other things, and then subvert them, take them, and use them to reconquer the colonies of the world, including the USA. So Chrisholm, I mentioned he worked at Tavistock. He was a real psychopath. And in one of his original statements, his speeches, when the World Health Organization is being set up in 1940, I think 46 or 47, he literally says, to achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas. This guy has a lot of quotes like this, but that's just one clear one where the point is always get rid of nation state, get rid of the idea of our traditions, our past, and create a blank slate for humanity. One of the things that was being done in Tavistock in the 1920s in London was work on shell shock. How do you deal with the psychological states of soldiers that had seen things you should never see in life, who had dismantled their personalities through shell shock, and how was it the case that their malleability, their loss of confidence in their own wisdom or judgment or identities, which accompanied shell shock, how could that be reproduced in schoolrooms, in governments more broadly, which was always the question. How do you apply this to group psychology? One of the guys he worked with who ran Tavistock throughout much of this period was Brigadier General John Rawlings Rees. That's a picture of the guy smoking a pipe. Now, Rawlings-Reese goes on to co-found the World Federation of Mental Health in 1948 as a branch of the World Health Organization. So this guy, one of the quotes, again, many ugly quotes, he basically says, we can therefore justifiably stress our particular point of view with regards to the proper development of the human psyche, even though our knowledge be incomplete. We must aim to make it permeate every educational activity in our national life. We have made a useful attack upon a number of professions. The two easiest of them, naturally, are the teaching profession and the church. The two most difficult are law and medicine. This is a 1940 speech on strategic planning for mental health. He's already thinking about the post-war era. And he's the guy who's calling for psychiatric shock troops to be set up in government planning institutions, in technocracies all over the world to modify human feelings, thought, and behavior. So he's a very strong behaviorist. So this guy sets up the World Federation of Mental Health along with his cohort, Chrisholm. Third guy runs UNESCO, so the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization. All three of them are thinking education. How do you cleanse society by focusing your efforts on the young, the people who are the children of the veterans of World War II, who are going to be the most malleable and subject to the conditioning you want to bring into being that will make them malleable tools. Basically, today's baby boomer generation, who went through a lot of conditioning under the LSD culture and other things that they were subjected to in the 1960s and 70s. Julian Huxley says the moral for UNESCO, and this is in its purpose and philosophy, its founding document, the manifesto, is clear. The task laid upon it of promoting peace and security can never be wholly realized through the means assigned to it, education, science, and culture. It must envision some form of world political unity, whether through a single world government or otherwise, as the only certain means of avoiding war. In its educational program, it can stress the ultimate need for a world political unity and familiarize all peoples with the implications of the transfer of full sovereignty from separate nations to a world organization. Now, you could say, but okay, the UN, that's what it's all about. Not at all. The United Nations was created, and you could read the charter of the UN. It was created with the idea of national sovereignty enshrined in the charter. So unlike the League of Nations, which was a British imperial concoction, that was based on the abolishment of national sovereignty, the United Nations was always just based on the preservation of national sovereignty. It was supposed to be an area where people could work through their differences and plan economic development together. It was never meant to be an enforcement body. So people like Julian Huxley, Sir Julian Huxley, Brigadier General Rawlings Rees, and others, one thing about them is that they didn't believe that. They wanted to revive the League of Nations principle, but also eugenics, because all of them were big promoters of eugenics, the science of racial purification and the cleansing of the human gene pool. The idea of eugenics was essentially taking Darwinian evolution into our own hands consciously and organizing our species into the next phase of evolution. This is directly what plays into the thinking of the fourth industrial revolution, where human beings have to merge somehow with machines to be relevant for, you know, and it's really playing God. One of the things that I selected a second quote from Huxley, same document, UNESCO, Purpose and Philosophy, where he makes it clear. He says, at the moment, it is probable that the indirect effect of civilization is dysgenic instead of eugenic. Dysgenic meaning to get worse. Dumb people are procreating. Eugenic is to get better. And in any case, it seems likely that the dead weight of genetic stupidity, physical weakness, mental instability, and disease proneness, which already exist in the human species, will prove too great a burden for real progress to be achieved. Thus, even though it is quite true that any radical eugenic policy will be for many years politically and psychologically impossible, it will be important for UNESCO to see that the eugenic problem is examined with the greatest care and that the public mind is informed of the issues at stake so that much that is now unthinkable may at least become thinkable. So I'm just going to stop the sharing right there. But let that sink in, right? Because this is a guy, what does he go and do? And I know we've spoken about this a couple of weeks ago, but just to really drive this home, and this gets at also the anomaly of ExxonMobil, the Rockefeller oil interests, Shell, Dutch, all of these things that are going for a decarbonization policy. They're without any fight. They're actually promoting it. It's not a discrepancy. So when you look at what did Julian Huxley do next, he co-founds the World Wildlife Fund in 1961 with who? Prince Bernhard and Prince Philip. Right, 1960. Bilderberger founder, right? Prince Bernhard. He creates the International Conservation Trust in 1947, the first movement to try to create an ethic of conservation instead of production, of preserving nature from human civilization. He creates transhumanism, the underlying philosophy of the idea of the genetic modification of the species with things like CRISPR, which Rhodes Scholar, what's his name, Eric Lander, the current science czar of the United States under Biden. This is what he, as the lead geneticist from Oxford, was all about with the Human Genome Project that he ran. It's the idea is to permanently manipulate the human genome forever at the behest of this brave new world class, right? So that's Julian Huxley, who creates transhumanism as a term and a philosophy. Now, all three organizations together, UNESCO, World Health Organization, and the World Federation of Mental Health, all three of them work together, funded by the Macy Foundation, which is a big eugenics sponsoring organization that was created by the funds of Josiah Macy, who himself created like an oil industry in the 19th century that became quickly absorbed by the Rockefeller Standard Oil Trust in the 1890s. So it's really just a Rockefeller front. But the Macy Foundation was created to fund health, like it's an NGO, kind of like a trust that was funding health science, but it was all eugenics throughout the 1930s and 40s. This Macy Foundation, with these other organizations whose leaders we just read quotes of, goes on to fund a series of conferences called the Macy Foundation Conferences from 1942 to 1953 on cybernetics. And this is what then creates, I mean, they pick an acolyte of Bertrand Russell, a guy named Norbert Wiener, who is a young child genius back in the 1910s. And he becomes a disciple studying at Cambridge directly under Bertrand Russell as part of his little coterie of young, brilliant misanthropes. And Bertrand Russell had already, and people probably know the name Bertrand Russell, this guy is a grand strategist for the empire. He's one of the leading controllers of grand strategy throughout the 20th century. What this guy does is he creates a project in 1900. So at the same time that you have this burst of Abraham Lincoln's policies going international with Otto von Bismarck's Germany, creating the Zollverein, rail and development across Russia, same things are occurring across the Meiji Restoration of Japan, is an anti-imperial development strategy of sovereign nations working together for big projects to define a new ethic of win-win cooperation that's more in harmony with human nature than anything we'd ever seen. And that was what was defining the end of the 19th century. So, and I'm jumping back and forth here, but people need to hold all of this in their mind if they want to get a unity of thought of what is causing our problems. What are the solutions? They have to have this. So Bertrand Russell creates a project in 1900 with David Hilbert. And the project is to create a unification of sciences, which includes biology, chemistry, physics, math, political science, sociology, psychology, and to create an internally consistent ideology of the master class of the British Empire to gain control of the world. And he does this in a Future of Mathematics conference where the challenge is laid by Bertrand Russell and Hilbert in Göttingen to try to mathematize the entire universe into a limited amount of assumptions that you could reduce everything to. So to basically make it a closed entropic system. And then find ways of organizing new theories of political economy, psychology, and philosophy to apply it to actually get the human species into that cage and thus prevent them from going down the path of what Abraham Lincoln, or at the time William McKinley, who had just been assassinated, were trying to get the world to go to, which is, again, world of cooperating sovereign nation states. Very different. So that's what they had to stop. Bertrand Russell, he acquires this young boy who's like this world genius named Norbert Wiener of mathematics. He's on the cover of all sorts of magazines as like this young protege. His father, unfortunately, hands him over to Bertrand Russell, who he works under for a year with David Hilbert, is his other professor. And he is given the challenge to find ways to carry this out. He becomes the founder of automation, systems analysis, and cybernetics. Yep. He does this because at the time in World War II, he's in charge of trying to figure out ways of making radar better that allows people to shoot down missiles or planes. One of the problems that are being encountered at the time is information. How do you get, once your machine has, using the radar, acquires the velocity and position of a plane, it takes time for that information to arrive back to the person controlling the radar, and time for them to plug in a response such that that plane is now in a totally different place. So how do you maximize that feedback loop is what he's looking at. It's all about feedback. And ultimately, he comes out of this with a whole theory of Bertrand, basically a eureka in his mind of how do you unify everything around information, a closed system. And the Macy Foundation, starting in 1942, I'm going to be publishing a paper on this next week, which goes through a lot of the details of this. But basically, in short form, they then are providing the money, and they're saying, okay, let's get together people from every field of science into these Macy conferences to figure out how do they apply cybernetics. Now, cybernetics, as a name that he gave it, it's rooted in a Greek term for helmsman. So the idea is using, for example, they use the example of a machine as the same thing as a human nervous system, and all parts of the machine, let's say let's say a human being with a brain and a central nervous system, your parts don't have to know what everything is doing. My hand, only doesn't have any internal knowledge unto itself. It's all being controlled by one point of control in my mind. So they're saying, okay, a human government, if you want to control a government or a classroom or a bureaucracy or a military, you could apply this by having compartmentalize the system into like specialized cogs of machines. So every department has their own specialization. No department in a government can see or understand what the other departments are really doing in a serious way, such that only a small group, maybe 2 or 3 people with a small executive, are in the helmsman position, right? If you're rowing a boat, you got like 80 people rowing the boat and maybe a few mopping the deck. They don't have to know the science of navigation. Only the navigator needs to know that. So this becomes something which people like Chrisholm, Julian Huxley, Bertrand Russell, who's unfortunately living for a very long time, they are all drooling over this and figuring out ways to apply it to these different fields. And another name for this becomes systems analysis. That everything is a system, but the systems are always closed entropic systems. Because they're closed, they must be entropic. Because they're entropic, if you have human beings in them, it means that you always have to focus on mathematical equilibrium. That's why they're trying to mathematize everything. The problem here is that it was refuted in 1932. This whole system of Bertrand Russell that he applied in his Principia Mathematica 3-volume series with Alfred North Whitehead, it was totally destroyed by Einstein's buddy, Kurt Gödel. And Gödel basically said, okay, he's like this humble young mathematician, but he's moral. He's a follower of Leibniz. And he's like, there's something wrong here with Bertrand Russell's idea of trying to, create a closed universe. And he basically proves in a very short, dense way that anytime you have a closed system that's self-bounded, there's always something outside of the system that must exist.
Correct.
By virtue, and he used the example of a self-referential thing, like to say, I am lying. As soon as I say I am lying, well, am I telling you the truth or am I lying, right? So all of a sudden that breaks down the entire logic that might be contained within the system, because it both answers, neither one equates. So it's like a glitch. And these guys in Tavistock are looking at it. So this is destroyed. And Bertrand Russell is enraged. He's embarrassed. And he never forgives Gödel for this. Gödel actually ends up dying in 1972 by self-starvation because Gödel is convinced, maybe rightfully so, that Bertrand Russell is running a conspiracy to destroy science and is trying to poison him.
Oh yeah,
that's actually how he dies. And his wife, he'll only accept food being prepared by his wife, and his wife gets sick, goes to the hospital for a few days, and unfortunately, no one is there to feed him, and he dies. So that's sad. But all that to say, Bertrand Russell, he was probably partially right in some of that. But all that to say, so Bertrand Russell's theory is destroyed. But despite that, the application of his theory in the form of systems analysis that goes on to create and generate the political economy system of the Great Reset that all underlies this is there. And people like in Tavistock, they're looking at feedback. They got a whole theory of how shock therapy is caused by feedback overload, which prevents people from growing as a person. But they're looking at all of these things of feedback information and they're trying to find ways of how do you wipe the hard drive of people and of nations? How do you wipe the hard drive and then create a new hard drive through imposing shock into the system? And it's all programming, right? It's all they themselves are persuaded, perhaps in some ways, that human beings can be replaced by machines, but only because they think like machines. If you actually thought like a human being, a creative person like Kurt Gödel or Einstein or Max Planck, none of this would work. So the lucky thing in all of this is that human beings, as people like Putin, Xi Jinping are aware, are not a closed, but rather an open system, that we're part of the universe. And the universe, by all evidence, is an open, creative, living universe. It is not a dead, dying heat death of a universe. Anybody who thinks that is really just a dupe for
a nihilist Satanist.
Unfortunately, you just said it straight up, but yeah, that's exactly it. The universe is actually living. Good news. We're told that things are slowly, eeping down to a heat death of nothingness. There's no evidence really backing that up, and the evidence that we are given in terms of like that's a whole other probably discussion for us. But it's fake evidence. It's not real. So by developing human economy and shaping it around large scale projects that invoke human creative thought, by elevating people out of poverty where they can start using their minds, instead of just being beasts of the field. That's something that is uniquely today coming out of the Belt and Road, the multipolar alliance, and that approach. There's problems going on in all parts of the world, including China. I'm not saying that it's all perfect. However, that's the orientation. That's the sort of thing that we had seen coming out of Franklin Roosevelt's orientation that he intended the post-war world to be based upon. That's the same orientation we had seen coming out of the Civil War, where Lincoln's followers intended for and fought for this type of win-win open system world of cooperation around things like the Bering Strait rail tunnel to be a defining character of a new world of cooperation. Under that, if that hadn't been sabotaged with assassinations, color revolutions in Russia, and world wars, you could say we could probably already have been colonizing Mars for the past 80 years, probably, but we've been held back. And these assholes who are just under a religion of eugenics and misanthropy are completely committed to getting humanity back into the little cage they want us to live in, and then so that they could make the cage smaller under this Brave New World dystopia. So it's really, those are the conditions of the current clash of paradigms, and I wanted people really just to have an appreciation for that. And I'll send out my article when it's done that'll go through a lot more detail that people can internalize and communicate, like learn how do you teach this, communicate some of these core ideas to other people, because we have to be better communicators and teachers, not just consumers of information, the way Norbert Wiener thinks of human beings and information as consumers, no producers.
Very well said, Matthew. That was epic, my man. Epic. And folks, if you missed this broadcast, you can re-listen to it, but also most importantly, get over to the Substack. Get over to Matthew's site, subscribe, support. We need information like this to start breaking through the obsolete binary thinking that many of us in the West have been our minds have been calcified by it. We need to break through. And it's information like this that breaks you through. It's invaluable. So I ask all of you that are listening in right now on all the platforms, on 7 or 8 platforms that this broadcast is going out under, go to the Substack, go to his websites. The links are all in the description box. Support him monetarily, support him with your time, support him with the talent, support him with the treasure, because we're all in this fight together. We're all in this fight together. And I'll tell you right now, information like this is invaluable as we are reaching the zenith, the epoch of the collapse and unraveling of Western civilization. Matt, any last words you want to say?
Yeah, and I would just say that what with my wife Cynthia and I, as I've said, I like plugging this at the end of our little conversations, but every Sunday we organize weekly symposia featuring different topics on science, on statecraft, on history. This last week was on Plato and Confucius, two kindred spirits at two ends of the world island. It's a wonderful class that's available on our website, risingtidefoundation.net. And next week, it's going to be Cynthia going through the geopolitics of Plato's fight. So what was the geopolitical environment around which Plato found himself on the world stage, and how did he operate to create a real philosopher king on several occasions in opposition to very evil forces that we're currently still dealing with. So every week we do this. I usually request that people make a donation monthly or individual. It could go as little as $1 or $2 a month. If you don't have funds, that's really okay. You'll still get the invitation to be a part of the weekly lectures. Just send an email to info@risingtidefoundation.net if you do want to receive the Zoom invitations. And yeah, we just look forward to having more people learning together and communicating what they learn to others, because we need to make this popular, like this process of learning and taking our education into our own hands. It's got to be made more popular fast. So hopefully people do that. And I just wanted to throw that and pitch that out there.
Very well said. And with that, folks, we're at the end of the broadcast. Again, check out the links and check out his work. We love it here. We love having Matt live here. I mean, live here.
I hope so.
But live. Live here on Rogue. And with that being said, CJ, take it away.